In today's video, we're going to go a little bit deeper into one of the key foundations to the adaptive asana method, which is empowerment. Now, we will look at what components of a yoga practice can sometimes be disempowering for people. But before we get there, we're going to take a look at the modern yogi, the modern person of today that is coming into practice, and why they might already be entering a practice with disempowerment rather than empowerment. And then we'll lead into how sometimes certain styles of yoga and ways of teaching yoga and approaching and practicing asana can actually feed into that disempowerment. Now, the average person of today is often quite disconnected from themselves. We do not live a life where we're very connected into our natural state of being. This is why most of us are here as yoga teachers, is because we're trying to help people to connect back to themselves. So when we look at the modern person, we generally do not have very much of a sense of self-responsibility. We don't tend to take ownership for ourselves, and we are often going about our lives in a state of victimhood. This is because it is very uncomfortable and can be quite triggering to actually take responsibility for yourself, your actions, and your life in general. Now, the adaptive asana method helps to bring awareness to that type of thing, number one. And number two, it helps to create a situation where your students are then able to act from a place of empowerment, because we are able to offer them adaptations in a way that is empowering for them. So again, this comes back to, how do we present asana? How do we show up as teachers and teach asana and deliver asana in a way that really does genuinely facilitate deep personal empowerment for our students? Now, the other thing that is really important for you to understand and be aware of when it comes to knowing your students and the modern yogi, again, this is most people, is that we are generally living our lives trying to fit in. And this is because of something called herd mentality, where from a biological perspective, we needed to fit in with the crew, with the tribe, with the pack, in order to survive. And that totally makes sense. We need that. We need our crew, we need our community, we need those people around us, and we want to be able to fit into a particular way of being or doing things in order to find some harmony within our lives to really increase our chances of survival. However, what's happening with the modern day yogi is that we are taking this herd mentality, this pack mentality, which is not only just fitting in with everyone else, but it is also trying to appease the authority figure, and we are taking that into our yoga classes. Your students are often showing up into their classes and practicing under this herd mentality. And so what ends up happening is they are even more unlikely to really tune in and connect with themselves and what they need. Now, this is a very purposeful biological adaptation, this herd mentality and this approach, but it is just not needed when we come into the yoga room and we step on the mat. So you can start to wrap your head around this a little bit and see where you yourself in your practice, or where your students seem to really want to conform and fit into things. Now, I do believe that there is an importance to respecting and honoring what it is that goes on in a particular space or in a particular class, but not if it means that your students are overriding their own needs. Now, when we learn to teach this adaptive asana method, this really does take all of that tendency and it just totally eliminates it for your students. We're going to speak to it. We're going to empower them to step outside of their biological tendencies towards fitting in with the herd and appeasing the authority figure, the pack leader, the teacher. So the more that you can teach them with adaptive asana approaches, the more that they begin to see and feel into how they can be empowered, which then helps to mitigate some, maybe all of that mentality that they come in with, which is, I've got to fit in, I've got to do what he's doing, oh, look at what she's doing, I've got to do exactly what the teacher's telling me to do. And instead, they begin to utilize their own inner wisdom because they are empowered, and they begin to break down some of that conditioned psychology of herd mentality on their mats. Now, this brings us back to looking at where some components of a yoga practice, depending on the style or how it's taught, can actually be disempowering for people and can be feeding that tendency towards herd mentality. Now, most people would assume that the practice of yoga is just inherently empowering. However, there are many things that can show up in a practice that are not. Not being informed. When we don't give our students enough information, they don't have the context that they need to make an informed choice, to make a choice that actually really aligns with them and their needs. And this can be very disempowering. They don't have the information. They don't know how to make a decision or what to base a decision on. So they'll just end up likely doing what the teacher wants them to do or what everyone else around them is doing. Biased options or no options at all. So if we're presenting something with a bias such as, oh, to go deeper, do this, or the more advanced option is this thing, then we're presenting that with a bias, and that is disempowering for our students, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail later on. Also, no options. We might not give them any options, so they feel excluded and disempowered if there's nothing available for them to actually be able to do. If they think that the teacher knows best. Sometimes classes are led in this way, where students are not necessarily empowered to know what's best for themselves, and they just kind of follow along with what everyone else is doing or with whatever else is happening in the room, and they give their power away to the teacher because they think that the teacher knows everything and they couldn't possibly know better, and this can be very disempowering for them as well. Correct alignment. This is a big one, and one that we're going to get into much more deeply later on in this course. But if we are giving our students this one way of doing something, this idyllic way of aligning their bodies, and that doesn't work for them, it is incredibly disempowering because they are disconnecting from what it is that might actually be best for them or feel right or provide the most value. Other thing is moving together, breathing together. If we try to encourage our students to move in like this orchestrated, conducted, performative way, yeah, it can feel really nice and there's therapy in that. It can be fun. There's a beautiful energy in that. However, it does disempower our students because it disconnects them from knowing and tuning into and responding to what it is that their body is telling them and what they might need, because the synchronicity in the performance aspect, that really just kind of takes over. Now, there is always exceptions to these things, and I'm fully aware of that, but from what I have seen, most of these things are not providing deep, genuine, long-lasting, transformative empowerment for our students. And these are things that we're going to address, and you're going to learn how to work through and navigate your way around using this adaptive asana method. Now we're going to go into much more detail in some of the later videos about how you can create an experience for your students that really truly is empowering when it comes to the way you deliver your cues, the way you deliver modifications, variations, and the way that you ultimately sequence your classes for your students. And this will really help you to gain an even deeper understanding about how the adaptive asana method really does work.